You walk down a cobbled street, the chill of an early morning London fog hanging in the air like a soft, damp blanket. The sky is a muted gray, with only the faintest hints of light pushing through. It's the kind of morning that makes you want to roll over and pull the covers back over your head. But not today, not now. Today, you're walking towards something that would change the world forever, the First Coffeehouse in London. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let me give you a friendly warning. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because it's boring. Oh no, this is quite the opposite. But because this coffeehouse was so transformative, it might make you rethink your morning routine, your work habits, and your entire life. Imagine, just for a second, that coffee wasn't the little, caffeine-packed fuel we rely on for staying awake during those soul-crushing 3 p.m. meetings. Imagine a time when it was a mysterious, exotic drink that people sipped in crowded, lively establishments. And it didn't even have the same rich, deep smell that you now associate with your kitchen. Sounds strange, right? Please stick with me. You'll get there. Now, as you step through the door of this First Coffeehouse, you feel a sudden rush of warmth that contrasts with the sharp bite of the fog outside. It smells like roasted beans. Rich, bitter, and comforting. You glance around, taking in the sight of the room. People chatter at wooden tables, the hum of conversation rising and falling like waves on a gentle sea. This was no ordinary place to sip a drink, no sir. Coffee houses in 17th century London were a mix of a cafe, a modern-day office, and a lecture hall all rolled into one. You can imagine it now. Lengthy discussions about politics, the latest in science, or the recent storm that tore up the coast. But it wasn't just talk for the sake of talk. It was intellectual talk. The kind that made you feel like you were doing something productive, even if you were sitting there, sipping slowly on your drink, thinking about how your life would go if you were, say, an inventor or a lawyer. At the heart of this was a drink that no one knew too much about. Imported from the far reaches of the Ottoman Empire, coffee was nothing like it is now. It wasn't a fast morning jolt. It was a slow burn, an elixir that gave your mind just enough lift to keep the ideas flowing, but not so much that it turned you into a jittery mess. That first coffee house in London, opened in 1652 by a man named Pasqua Rossi, marked the beginning of a new era. Just imagine, at first no one knew what to make of the drink. People either loved it or hated it. Some were so opposed to it that they even petitioned the king to ban it, calling it the bitter invention of Satan. Yet, despite these early protests, the coffeehouse culture continued to grow fast. Historians still debate whether the rise of coffeehouses was the primary catalyst for the Age of Enlightenment or merely a symptom of the broader intellectual fever sweeping Europe at the time. Some say coffeehouses were a breeding ground for ideas, where intellectuals and politicians could meet and hash out their wildest theories over a cup of something hot. Others argue that they were simply a fad, a fashionable drink for the well-to-do who couldn't resist the latest import. Either way, the coffeehouse came to symbolize more than just a place to grab a quick sip. It was a space for freedom, for conversations, for the exchange of knowledge. You can almost picture it now, an early version of Twitter, except instead of hashtags, it was the discussions about whether or not the earth was flat or how many letters the alphabet could handle. And speaking of freedom, coffeehouses were where you could hear everything, the good, the bad, and the weird. It's said that in these early establishments, people from all walks of life gathered. Merchants, writers, scholars, and even the occasional nobility. The first patrons didn't just sit and sip. They engaged in debates about politics, philosophy, and religion. They argued over whether Galileo was right about the universe or if Sir Isaac Newton's theories were more grounded. It was intellectual chaos, but in the best way. It's been said that the coffee house was the birthplace of modern journalism, as pamphleteers and writers used the social atmosphere to spread their opinions and ideas. The coffee house wasn't just a business. It was a marketplace of the mind. The coffee house culture in London began to spread like wildfire. By the late 17th century, there were hundreds of them, each one offering its take on the idea of intellectual exchange. The Royal Society, for example, found its home in a coffee house. It's not an exaggeration to say that it was there that the seeds of modern science were planted. Imagine that. A room full of people arguing about the natural world, sipping on a warm, slightly bitter drink. And yet, it was the kind of environment that encouraged the free exchange of ideas. It was a place where people discussed the profound questions that still linger today. At the same time, the cultural mix of the coffeehouse started to grow. You could find yourself sitting next to a local merchant, a poet, a scientist, or a gentleman who had just come back from the East Indies. You could hear rumors of exotic places, learn about the latest travels, or listen to the most ridiculous stories, all over a steaming cup of coffee. If only social media had a more sophisticated ancestor than this. In the 1600s, Twitter was essentially a bustling room full of people who couldn't stop talking, just with fewer emojis. But here's the funny part. As much as the coffeehouse was celebrated, it was also a bit of a battleground. The intellectual and political debates sometimes got so heated that fists were thrown. Imagine walking into your favorite coffee spot and witnessing a full-on, passionate argument about who was the real genius behind calculus, Newton or Leibniz. And then, of course, there were the people who just came for the drama. You could almost hear the crowd murmuring behind you. Did you hear that so-and-so is trying to prove the earth is round? Someone should stop them. It was like an old-school version of the comments section in any online discussion, except everyone was too polite to type in all caps. Remember that road you crossed earlier? It's back. That very same road led you to this cultural revolution. Every major London coffeehouse played its part in changing the world's cultural landscape. Now, it wasn't just about coffee or intellectual debates. It was about community. For all its intellectual hustle and bustle, the coffeehouse was a space where people from diverse backgrounds came together. For a time, it was a shared space of discourse and dreaming. Now, let's relax on tonight's ride through history. Let's settle into this world, sip our metaphorical cup of coffee, and see how the humble coffeehouse became one of the world's first social media platforms, just with fewer keyboards. And while we're here, feel free to let the soft chatter of the past lull you into a state of calm. You're safe here. Relax, breathe, and let the history of the London coffeehouse work its magic. You sit back, letting the quiet hum of the coffeehouse surround you. The air, once thick with the fog of London, now feels lighter, as if the conversations and the whispers of knowledge have somehow made it to your soul. Imagine this. It's the 17th century, and you're in a city full of cobbled streets and horse-drawn carts. The world is changing, and at the center of this change is something as simple and as transformative as coffee. Now, picture the scene. More and more coffeehouses are opening up across London, one after the other. It's almost as though the entire city has caught a fever. And, believe it or not, this fever is contagious. Each new establishment that pops up isn't just another cafe to grab your drink. It's a symbol of something much larger, a shift in society. You might even call it a revolution. But don't worry, there's no need to stock up on pitchforks and torches. This revolution didn't involve any violent uprising. Instead, it was about the exchange of ideas, knowledge, and, let's be real here, gossip. By the end of the 1600s, London had over 300 coffeehouses. That's a lot of caffeinated energy for a city that still thought it was a good idea to get around by horse. And here's a fun tidbit. Many of these coffeehouses became known for specific specialties. One might be the place to go if you wanted to hear about the latest news in science, while another was favored by lawyers who wanted to discuss the finer points of legal theory. Some coffeehouses even took on a theme. Can you imagine walking into a cafe that advertised itself as the coffeehouse of the arts? That's precisely what you would find in London, where artistic types gathered and exchanged their latest creative ideas. Coffee was the glue that held all these people together. And yet, even as coffeehouses became the hub of intellectual discourse, they were still considered a bit wild. Remember the scene in the first coffeehouse you visited? Well, it didn't take long for things to get a bit out of hand. Some coffeehouses gained a reputation for being the place to find the latest rumors or the newest underground ideas. After all, it wasn't just serious thinkers who frequented these spots. Now and then, someone would show up with a scandalous idea that had everyone talking. Imagine the coffeehouse as the early version of a viral TikTok video. It was where you could go to hear the latest and greatest stories, often embellished beyond recognition. People loved that, Historians continue to debate whether this was a positive or negative development for society. Did it encourage creative freedom, or did it just fuel chaos? One thing's for sure: the people of London had no shortage of ideas flying around. Many of these ideas, particularly those related to science and politics, would ultimately shape the course of history. And the coffee house played a significant role in this. It was here that the Royal Society, one of the world's most influential scientific organizations, found its roots. Think about it. These groundbreaking ideas were being discussed over a warm cup of coffee in a humble, bustling establishment. It's almost poetic, but not everyone was on board with the rise of the coffee house. If you were to look at it from a more conservative point of view, it was a dangerous place. These coffee houses were often seen as breeding grounds for disruption. Imagine how wild it must have seemed to people who preferred the more traditional, quiet life of a tavern or a home filled with nothing but the smell of roasted meats and ale. These new coffee houses were filled with the kind of energy that could spark change, or even revolt. There's an old saying that goes, "If you want to change the world, start with a cup of coffee." Okay, maybe I just made that up, but you get the idea. At the heart of it all was the fact that coffee houses brought together people from every corner of society. Imagine that: common folk, business people, poets, scientists, politicians, everyone in the same room exchanging ideas. There was even a coffee house specifically for the wealthy, where you could sip on your brew while discussing matters of state. It was like a fancy, intellectual version of the modern-day internet forums, minus the ability to comment anonymously from behind a screen. The debates weren't always friendly, but that was part of the charm. The fact that ideas could be tested and challenged in such an open forum was revolutionary. And then there was the most interesting part of it all. Coffee houses weren't just a place for the elite or the intellectuals. They also gave a platform to those who didn't usually have a voice. Writers and pamphleteers used coffee houses as their stage, printing out pamphlets and spreading them around the tables for everyone to read. Imagine the sense of empowerment that must have come with knowing your words were being shared with a room full of people. And what about the fact that those very words could spark a chain of events that would influence the way people thought about the world? Now that's power. How does this all tie back to coffee itself? Well, let me tell you, it wasn't just the drink that brought people together. It was the environment, the atmosphere that these coffee houses created. It was about feeling a part of something larger than yourself, a place where you could sit, sip, and think. And as you think about all of this, imagine yourself sitting in one of these coffee houses, surrounded by the sounds of bustling conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, and the rhythmic clink of porcelain cups on wooden tables. You take a slow sip of your drink, and for a moment you're lost in the world of ideas and possibilities. Now, as much as we romanticize these early coffeehouse days, it's important to remember that not everyone was as charmed by them as we are today. The rise of coffeehouses, with their intellectual energy and social gatherings, also sparked an increase in competition. Soon enough, people weren't just fighting for the best intellectual debates or the most incredible new ideas, they were fighting for customers. Some coffeehouse owners began offering special promotions or even free coffee to attract the crowds. It's like watching a modern-day barista trying to provide a better latte than the place down the street. Except these folks were battling for more than just the perfect espresso. In the end, though, it wasn't about the competition. It was about the idea that coffeehouses represented a new way of thinking, of talking, and of engaging with the world. The fact that the coffeehouse culture spread beyond London's borders should come as no surprise. Eventually, these little havens of intellectual freedom traveled far and wide, across Europe, into the Middle East, and even into the Americas. It was in these coffeehouses that the seeds of the Enlightenment were sown. It was there that the ideas of democracy, freedom of speech, and scientific discovery grew. And what started as a simple drink, bitter, warm, and strange, became the catalyst for a movement that would change the way we live, think, and interact with each other. Now, let's take a deep breath and relax, as we let the memory of these early coffeehouses gently guide us through this moment in time. After all, what is a coffeehouse but a place to sit, sip, and dream? Just like now, all over the world, people are still gathering. At cafes, at tables, at counters, to share, to debate, and to enjoy a cup of something warm. You feel a soft warmth in the air as the gentle buzz of the coffeehouse continues around you. It's not too loud, but enough to keep your mind engaged, like the soft hum of a busy city street in the background. As you sit back, your mind drifts to the idea of how something as simple as a drink, coffee, could hold such power, not just over the people who consumed it, but over entire societies. The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. These coffeehouses didn't just serve coffee. They served something deeper. They served a space where change was brewed, one sip at a time. Let's take a step back and picture this. You're in one of those very coffeehouses, surrounded by a diverse crowd. Some are whispering about the latest political upheaval in France, and others are discussing new philosophies on freedom. You overhear talk about science, the kind of science that's starting to shake the foundations of society. It's the dawn of the Enlightenment, and the coffeehouse is the stage where it all plays out. Sure, there are some quiet conversations, but for the most part, these gatherings are the intellectual equivalent of a rock concert. People excited, people engaged, people ready to shift the world around them. By the 1700s, coffeehouses had become central hubs for the exchange of ideas and information. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion that everyone there was calmly sipping on their drinks, discussing the finer points of Kant. No, there was real drama in these spaces, ideas clashing like swords in a battle of wits. The coffeehouse wasn't a place for the faint of heart. You had to be ready to take on the world's big questions, from what's the nature of man, to how does one govern a nation, or, if you were in a particularly spicy mood, is democracy even worth the effort? But it wasn't just philosophers and politicians who had a seat at the table. No, these coffeehouses were places where people from every social stratum could come together. You could be a common merchant or a nobleman. For the price of a cup of coffee, you could argue with a gentleman about the validity of Newton's theories or speculate about the subsequent significant discovery. It was an intellectual melting pot, a place where social boundaries were, at least for a few hours, relaxed. And that's where the real magic happened, the merging of ideas across classes, fostering a sense of unity and equality. Historians still debate whether coffeehouses directly influenced the rise of modern democracy or if their influence was more symbolic in nature. Some suggest that the ideas discussed within their walls helped lay the groundwork for revolutions in America and France, inspiring and shaping the democratic societies we know today. In contrast, others believe the coffeehouse was merely a backdrop for larger social movements already underway. Either way, the coffeehouse was a catalyst for discussion and, perhaps more importantly, for action. If you encourage people to discuss the structure of society, you can prompt them to consider changing it, instilling a sense of hope and inspiration in the audience. And change did come. Coffeehouses became spaces where people could openly discuss politics, sometimes even plotting major political movements. If you were a political dissenter in the 18th century, a coffeehouse was the best place to exchange ideas and find others who shared your views. The first stirrings of the French Revolution, for instance, were likely discussed over a cup of coffee. Revolutionary pamphlets were printed in coffeehouses and read aloud in their lively rooms. The ideas that led to the American and French revolutions were not born in secret meetings held in dark corners. They were developed in broad daylight, over coffee and conversation. Coffeehouses played a significant role in the expansion of the press. The first newspapers, pamphlets, and leaflets, many of them incredibly controversial, were circulated in these bustling spaces. Imagine being the person who walks into a coffeehouse and suddenly finds yourself holding a fresh copy of the latest political commentary, all hot off the press. It was like the early version of getting your hands on a trending tweet or viral news story, only slower and with fewer emojis. This expansion of the press in coffeehouses made people feel more informed and connected, shaping their understanding of the world around them. You can almost hear the debate in the air, can't you? The passionate exchange of ideas between coffee-sipping intellectuals and ambitious pamphleteers, each eager to make their mark on the world. At this point, the coffeehouse had evolved beyond just serving coffee. It was now offering a space for revolution, where ideas could ferment and take shape. If you didn't think something in society was working, you could walk into a coffeehouse and find like-minded individuals willing to entertain your notions. They might even help you turn those ideas into a plan of action. But let's not get too carried away here. these coffee houses weren't all filled with revolutionaries. Oh no, they also had their share of gossip and lighthearted chatter. The atmosphere was far from a serious lecture hall. You could overhear someone discussing the latest plays in town or share a good laugh over the day's fashion trends. For many, the coffee house was as much about relaxation as it was about intellectual stimulation. A nice balance, wouldn't you say? A break from the daily grind, where you could enjoy a cup of coffee, chat with friends, and still feel like you were being productive. Imagine that, socializing and intellectual growth all in one go. Sounds like the perfect way to pass the time, right? But for all the good times, there were, of course, the detractors. As we know, not everyone is a fan of progress. Many viewed the rise of the coffee house with skepticism, even fear. The English King Charles II famously tried to shut down the coffee houses in the 1670s, claiming that they were places where disaffected people gathered to undermine his rule. In his mind, the coffee house was a hotbed of sedition, a breeding ground for revolutionaries. Not exactly the type of venue you'd want to be seen at if you valued your head on your shoulders. Still, for all the resistance, the coffee house continued to thrive. And while Charles II's attempts to curb its influence didn't quite succeed, they did highlight just how powerful these spaces had become. They weren't just places for idle chatter. They were now the beating heart of social and political change. They were the birthplace of modern democracy, and they didn't even serve pastries, though we can all agree that might have been a missed opportunity. As you sit in the coffee house now, looking around at the faces, some thoughtful, some debating, some simply enjoying a quiet moment, you can't help but think about how much has changed. The world has undergone significant changes since those first cups of coffee were served. But one thing remains constant: the power of conversation, of coming together, of sharing ideas. And it's all thanks to something so simple, a cup of coffee. Now, as you finish your drink and rise to leave, you feel that same sense of possibility in the air. A conversation over a cup of coffee is all it takes to change the world. It has before, after all. You feel the weight of the world slipping away as you sip your drink, your eyes lazily scanning the room around you. There's a certain magic in the air tonight, something intangible that connects the people here. It's more than the shared warmth of coffee. It's the quiet undercurrent of creativity, the hum of ideas buzzing softly like the turn of a page or the stroke of a brush. The coffee house, you begin to realize, is not just a place for intellectual debates and political discussions. No, it's also a breeding ground for art, for literature, for expression. And the best part? It's all happening in the most relaxed of atmospheres, with a hot drink in hand. Let's think about it. This space you're in, so full of life, could very well have been the birthplace of the next great novel or painting. Why? Coffee houses played a central role in the development of literature and the arts in the 17th and 18th centuries. And we're not just talking about a casual doodle on a napkin or a quick poem jotted down in the corner. Oh no, these spaces were where the future giants of literature gathered to share their work, critique one another, and absorb the words of the best minds of the time. Take a moment to imagine this. The significant literary figures of the time, Jonathan Swift, Samuel Johnson, and Alexander Pope, were all regulars in the coffee houses of London. They didn't meet in quiet libraries or secret chambers. They met in places just like the one you're in now, where the noise of conversation and the clink of cups provided the backdrop for their creative musings. It's a bit surreal. These renowned minds, who went on to shape much of modern Western literature, could have easily been sitting right next to you. They probably were. Historians still debate whether the coffee house was the actual birthplace of much of the great literature of the 18th century, or if those same works would have emerged eventually, regardless of where they were written. Some suggest the atmosphere of the coffee house, a place where writers could exchange ideas and gain immediate feedback, was essential to their development. Others argue that the coffee house provided a social space where the true innovation happened elsewhere. Either way, these writers didn't just sit at their desks or in their parlors. They got out there, rubbed elbows with other thinkers, and breathed life into their stories in public spaces like these. It wasn't just the writers who were inspired by the coffee house atmosphere. The atmosphere itself was inspiring. Painters, musicians, and philosophers were all drawn into these lively spaces. It was an early form of networking, where you could be surrounded by a crowd of fellow creatives who, just like you, wanted to push the boundaries of their art. These were the spots where artists swapped ideas, shared their frustrations with the world, and were encouraged to create works that mattered. Imagine a painter, deep in thought about the next stroke of color on his canvas, but also aware of the conversation happening around him. A discussion about the latest trends in art or literature, or a debate over which philosopher was truly the most influential. Inspiration wasn't just a solitary affair. It was a collective experience. As you sit in this modern-day coffeehouse, reflecting on those early artistic days, you realize how much the atmosphere has stayed the same. Sure, the coffee might be a little more refined, and the decor a bit trendier, but the essence of what those early spaces provided has endured. The best ideas often come when you're surrounded by others who challenge you, inspire you, and yes, occasionally make you want to toss your pen in frustration. But that's part of the process. Take, for instance, the idea of the literary salon, which was essentially a fancy coffeehouse for the elite. Writers, poets, and philosophers gathered to discuss their work and critique one another. But instead of being surrounded by the common folk, as in the traditional coffeehouses, these salons were often limited to the upper crust of society. And yet, the dynamics remained the same. The exchange of ideas, the spark of creativity, and the feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. But in these salons, the conversations were often less lively and more exclusive. They were, in a way, the VIP sections of the coffeehouse world. Imagine sitting at a table with Voltaire, debating the merits of monarchy versus democracy. Quite the affair, right? But here's the funny part: what made these salons so exclusive was often the very thing that limited them. In the early coffeehouses, everyone was welcome: merchants, scholars, and nobility. No one was turned away because of their social status. This inclusive nature fostered a sense of belonging and equality, a reminder of how often creativity flourishes in the most unexpected places. The best ideas usually don't come from the most glamorous settings, after all. As you reflect on this, you may also notice the irony of it all. The rise of the coffeehouse was, in many ways, a reaction against the more traditional, rigid structures of society. It was about accessibility, about being able to talk freely and openly without fear of judgment or hierarchy. And yet, over time, these very spaces began to reflect the same systems they were once trying to dismantle. The early open discussions evolved into more controlled, elite settings. This evolution offers a sense of historical perspective and change, illustrating how the same ideas that were born in coffeehouses began to outgrow their origins. They became something larger, more organized, something more akin to what we know today as high culture. But let's not dwell too much on the irony. After all, we're here to relax, right? The coffeehouse was, in its purest form, a place where ideas flowed as freely as the drinks. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, educated or not. The coffeehouse was a space for everyone to come together and make something new. And perhaps, in a small way, that's what it still is today. A place where you can sip your drink, listen to others, and maybe, just maybe, get inspired by the ideas floating in the air. As you finish your drink, settle back into the chair, and let your mind wander. Know this: you are part of a long and rich tradition. A tradition that goes back centuries, where creativity, conversation, and community come together over something as simple as a cup of coffee. And who knows, maybe you'll leave this place with a new idea, ready to share it with the world. After all, that's how it all started. You take a slow breath, letting the calmness of the coffeehouse settle deeper into your bones. The cup in your hand is almost empty now, but the atmosphere around you is thick with the feeling of progress, of history being written in real time. As you glance around, you realize the coffeehouse isn't just a place where people come to drink and chat. Oh no, this is where the seeds of public opinion are sown, where the power of words first begins to grow into something far more influential. It's where the media we know today began to take shape, long before anyone had heard of podcasts, social media, or viral news stories. In these early coffee houses, people didn't just sit around idly chatting. They discussed everything: politics, religion, philosophy, the latest scientific discoveries. Anything that affected the public's consciousness was up for debate. Imagine yourself in one of these gatherings, sitting at a table, a warm cup in hand, listening intently to the voices around you. At the center of the conversation is the realization that what's being said isn't just a passing fancy. It's the beginning of the media revolution. Historians still debate when the first inklings of modern journalism took root, but one thing is clear: coffeehouses played a pivotal role. For centuries, these bustling spaces have been the centers of discourse, where people exchanged information, opinions, and ideas. It's hard to overstate how much influence coffeehouses had on shaping public opinion. Back then, you didn't have to scroll through endless news websites to get your information. Instead, you went to the coffeehouse, and there, you'd hear the latest gossip, the latest news, and the latest theories about everything from the monarchy's plans to the latest fashion trends. It was a one-stop shop for your daily dose of information, served with a side of caffeine. At the time, pamphlets, broadsheets, and newspapers were becoming more common, and where were they most commonly distributed? That's right in the coffeehouses. You could walk into a coffeehouse and find the day's edition of the latest political pamphlet or newspaper waiting for you on the table. Some coffeehouses even became hubs for the distribution of these written works, physical spaces where people gathered not just to chat, but to read and discuss the latest news. The pamphleteers were the first bloggers, and the newspaper editors the original content curators. Imagine the thrill of being the first to read the news before it hit your town, before it reached the masses. You were on the cutting edge, and your coffeehouse was to thank for it. This wasn't just a place for the well-read or the highly educated either. Coffeehouses democratized information in a way that had never been seen before. They gave ordinary people access to news and ideas that had once been confined to the aristocracy or intellectual elite. It didn't matter if you were a merchant, a poet, or a nobleman. In a coffeehouse, your ideas could be just as important as anyone else's. People from all walks of life sat side by side, exchanging news and opinions on equal footing. For the first time in history, a broader public could be involved in the conversation, challenging the status quo and questioning authority. But here's where things get interesting and a little bit comical. While the coffeehouse was the birthplace of modern media, it didn't continuously operate smoothly. Just as today, where debates can turn into flame wars in the comments section, discussions in coffeehouses could get heated. And because the coffeehouse was open to all, including people with little regard for authority or social norms, these discussions sometimes turned into chaotic and occasionally ridiculous affairs. Politicians and poets alike would sit around, raising their voices, arguing the finer points of their beliefs, all the while sipping their coffee. The coffeehouse, much like today's internet forums, was a place where everyone had a voice, but not necessarily a voice of the same quality of argument. Despite the occasional absurdity of these debates, the coffeehouse played a crucial role in shaping the media of the future. The ability for ideas to flow freely and for public opinion to be discussed and dissected was a precursor to modern journalism. It was in the coffeehouse that people learned to discuss, to argue, and to express their opinions. The very idea of freedom of speech was, in part, born here over a cup of coffee. To truly understand the impact of the coffeehouse on the media, consider the role these spaces played in political movements. The French Revolution, for example, was heavily influenced by the conversations and publications that spread in these coffeehouses. The same can be said for the American Revolution. Pamphlets that critiqued the monarchy and proposed radical ideas for new governments were often first discussed and spread within the walls of coffeehouses. Imagine walking into one of those establishments, hearing the latest rebellious ideas, and then seeing them published in the next day's newspaper. It's a fascinating glimpse into how media, fueled by coffee and heated debates, became the engine for social change. And while we're on the topic of social change, let's not forget the coffeehouse's role in shaping public opinion. It was here that people learned not just about politics and science, but also about the issues that affected their daily lives. How else would an ordinary person have access to the same information as the nobles? How else would new ideas about equality, rights, and freedoms be communicated? It was the coffeehouse, with its open exchange of ideas, that made these concepts accessible to everyone, not just the privileged few. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on how far we've come. In today's world, we still gather around a metaphorical coffeehouse, whether it's through social media, blogs, or the news we consume. While the format may have changed, the basic principle remains the same. We still rely on the exchange of ideas, the ability to debate, and the free flow of information. Just as in the old coffeehouses, those conversations still have the power to shape the world around us. As you sit back and sip your drink, you realize that the power of the coffeehouse is still with us today. Sure, we might not be sitting in wooden chairs with an intellectual crowd around us, but we're still connected by the same desire to learn, to discuss, and to exchange ideas. The spirit of those early coffeehouses is alive and well in the world of media, as well as in our conversations. So take a moment, breathe deeply, and appreciate the simple yet profound way a cup of coffee has changed the world. Not just for the people who drank it, but for all of us who continue to sip from the cup of knowledge today. The coffeehouse, in its quiet way, continues to shape our society, just as it did centuries ago. And who knows, maybe in 100 years, someone will sit back in a coffeehouse just like this one, reflecting on how we, the people of today, are part of that long and powerful tradition. You take another sip, feeling the warmth of the coffee trickle down, and for a moment, you close your eyes and let the atmosphere of the coffeehouse wash over you. It's the kind of place where you can feel time slowing down. In this space, with its soft murmurs of conversation, the world outside seems far away, almost irrelevant. But there's something else happening here, something you might not have noticed at first. You might think this is just a place for philosophers and poets, but there's a whole other side to the coffeehouse. The bustling, practical world of business and networking. At first glance, you might not think of a coffeehouse as a place for serious business deals. After all, it's filled with people discussing politics and literature, sipping on warm drinks, and chatting casually. But much like today, the coffeehouse was not only a social hub but also a place where business was done. The coffeehouse was, for many, the ideal setting for conducting business. The atmosphere was laid back enough to encourage conversation, yet severe enough to facilitate deals, forge connections, and discuss matters that impacted the flow of money. In a way, it was like an early version of a co-working space, except with more caffeine and fewer bean bags. Imagine the scene. You walk into a coffeehouse, a bit of fog still hanging in the air as the door swings open. You're not just there for a leisurely chat about the latest philosophical treatise. No, you've got an agenda. You sit down at a table with a merchant, a banker, and a lawyer. There's talk of trade routes, investments, and the latest shift in currency. No need to exchange business cards. Your reputation precedes you, and a simple handshake, coupled with a steaming cup of coffee, is enough to seal the deal. The conversation shifts between casual chatter and the kind of discussions that make or break businesses. What better place to make a connection, share a deal, or discuss the finer points of trade than here, in the company of like-minded individuals? It was within these very coffeehouses that ideas about commerce and industry were exchanged and refined. But coffeehouses weren't just for people trying to get rich. They were also a hub for new technologies and innovations. For example, one of the earliest instances of the Royal Society of London, yes, that very same scientific institution we associate with Newton and Boyle, took place in a coffeehouse. Many of the early members of the Royal Society would meet regularly in coffeehouses to discuss the latest in scientific discoveries. You could walk into a coffeehouse and overhear people debating the newest machines, agricultural innovations, and business methods that were starting to change the landscape of trade and industry. It was a melting pot of ideas that went beyond politics and philosophy. It was also about practical, everyday solutions. And just as there were meetings about science and trade, there were also exchanges about a very different kind of business public life. Coffee houses were also the birthplace of political movements and the formation of public opinion. After all, this was where you could read the latest pamphlet or listen to the debates of the day. But even more than that, the coffee house was the place where you could build your public image. Much like a modern-day entrepreneur launching a new product on social media, The intellectuals and business people of the day would use coffeehouses to spread their ideas, discuss their theories, and, just as importantly, network with the people who could help them achieve their goals. Think of it as a 17th century version of LinkedIn, but with better conversation and significantly more caffeine. Whether you were a poet, an inventor, a businessman, or even a politician, the coffeehouse was the place where you could build your reputation, expand your network, and find your next big opportunity. You could meet someone who would help fund your next great invention or find someone who shared your vision for changing the world. It was the ideal environment for building relationships, negotiating, and driving results. But let's not forget that business in the coffeehouse wasn't always serious. It had its lighter moments as well. After all, a good business deal is much more enjoyable when it's accompanied by a bit of humor and relaxation. Imagine, for a second, a conversation about trade routes or new scientific theories being punctuated by a good-natured laugh or a witty retort. That's the beauty of the coffeehouse. It was a place where serious business and light-hearted banter could coexist. The coffeehouse wasn't just about the formalities of commerce. It was a place where people could be human, where they could connect on a personal level as well as a professional one. Here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone was thrilled about the rise of business in coffeehouses. Some saw the mixing of business with intellectual debate as a bit crass. Imagine being a person who has spent their whole life studying philosophy or poetry, only to have their peaceful coffeehouse experience interrupted by a merchant discussing their latest trade deal. For some, the idea of the coffeehouse becoming a business place was seen as a degradation of its higher purpose, intellectual exchange. Yet, as we know, the coffeehouse adapted. It became a space for all kinds of interactions, whether philosophical, political, or commercial. Everyone, regardless of their social standing, had a seat at the table. So what can we take away from this? Perhaps it's the reminder that great things often happen in the most unexpected places. Coffeehouses were not just breeding grounds for new ideas about politics, art, or science. They were also where people came to create, negotiate, and grow. They were the first true spaces of networking and commerce, long before the internet facilitated connections. And just as today, coffee shops are used as meeting places for all kinds of business. In 17th and 18th century London, the coffeehouse was the perfect setting to discuss the future. As you take another sip of your coffee and look around the room, you feel the same buzz of energy that must have filled those historic spaces. The debates, the ideas, the potential, all just waiting to be unlocked. And in a way, as you sit there, you're still part of the same tradition. You might not be sealing the next great business deal or discussing the latest scientific breakthrough, but you're still part of the ongoing conversation, sipping on your coffee, letting the ideas come to you, just as they always have. You glance at the clock, and the realization hits you. This coffeehouse, this place, wasn't just the birthplace of ideas. It was where business, creativity, and public opinion collided in the most unlikely of ways, shaping the world around us. The murmur of voices swirls around you as you take another sip of your coffee, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. You settle deeper into your chair, the atmosphere of the coffeehouse enveloping you. For a moment, it feels like the world outside has melted away, leaving only the comforting hum of conversation and the soft clink of porcelain cups. But beneath this calm exterior, something else is happening here, a powerful undercurrent of change. You may not notice it right away, but the coffeehouse is more than just a place for casual socializing and intellectual exchange. It's a community, a space where everyone, from the commoner to the intellectual radical, is welcome. It's a hotbed for political and social movements, where ideas that could change the world are born, discussed, and refined. Let's take a trip back in time and imagine yourself sitting in a crowded coffeehouse in the heart of London. It's the 18th century, and the world is on the brink of monumental social and political change. People are discussing a range of topics, from the rights of the commoner to the role of the monarchy in society. It's hard to overstate the importance of these discussions. Coffeehouses were not just places where you went to pass the time or enjoy a good debate. They were activist spaces. They were where ideas about liberty, equality, and democracy first took shape. In the bustling coffeehouses, the early stirrings of political movements began to take root. Imagine the scene. You're surrounded by people from all walks of life. Merchants, artisans, scholars, and even a few intellectual radicals. They're sipping coffee, but they're also quietly plotting the future. The very discussions that take place in these rooms will lay the groundwork for major political upheavals. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, individual rights, and the questioning of authority, was fostered in coffeehouses like the one you find yourself in now. It was in these same spaces that some of the most important philosophical and political ideas were first discussed. Take, for example, the ideas of John Locke, whose theories on government and human rights laid the groundwork for the political thinking that spurred revolutions across the globe. In the coffeehouses of London, Locke's ideas were picked up, debated, and refined by intellectuals who were starting to envision a world where power didn't rest solely in the hands of the monarch. They imagined a society where people had a say in their government and where liberty wasn't just a privilege of the rich and powerful. Historians still debate whether the coffeehouse was the sole catalyst for the rise of democratic ideals or merely a convenient space for ideas to gain traction. Some argue that the coffeehouse gave a voice to those who were already inclined toward progressive ideas. In contrast, others contend that the very act of gathering and discussing in these open, democratic spaces was revolutionary in itself. Either way, the coffeehouse played a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of the time. And it wasn't just about abstract political ideas. No, these coffeehouses also became the birthplace of organized movements that sought to challenge the status quo. If you were to step into a coffeehouse in the late 1600s or early 1700s, you might overhear talk of the abolition of slavery, the fight for women's rights, or the push for universal suffrage. These ideas were highly controversial at the time, to say the least, and would not have been well received in many of the more conservative segments of society. But in the coffeehouse, you could speak freely, share your thoughts, and hear the thoughts of others, no matter how radical they might seem. The very idea that the coffeehouse could be a place where political and social movements were incubated is a powerful one. These establishments weren't just places of idle chatter or quiet reflection. They were active spaces, filled with people who were challenging the established order, asking questions that hadn't been asked before, and pushing the boundaries of what society thought was possible. They were platforms for change, where your voice, no matter how radical, was heard and respected. Of course, this influence wasn't limited to just the coffeehouses of London. As the coffeehouse culture spread throughout Europe and beyond, it became a key part of the intellectual and social fabric of many nations. In Paris, coffeehouses became the meeting places for revolutionary thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, whose ideas about human rights and the role of government would go on to inspire the French Revolution. In the American colonies, coffeehouses played a similar role in shaping the ideals of the revolutionaries who would go on to draft the Declaration of Independence. It's said that the Boston Tea Party itself, one of the most iconic moments of the American Revolution, was, in a way, a direct reaction to the culture of the coffeehouse. The event, which involved the dumping of British tea into Boston Harbor in protest of British taxes, symbolized the colonists' growing desire for independence and self-governance. The idea of rejecting foreign control over something as simple as a cup of tea was, in essence, a continuation of the spirit of the coffeehouse, where ordinary people could sit down together, discuss ideas, and ultimately decide that they deserved more than they had been given. But let's not get too carried away here. Coffeehouses weren't just the birthplace of revolutionary ideas. They were also a place for quieter, more subtle forms of political and social commentary. Take, for example, the literary salons in Paris. These were intellectual gatherings where writers, philosophers, and artists would discuss their ideas, often in the context of current social and political events. Here, too, the coffeehouse played a role in shaping public opinion, though in a more subtle way. Writers such as Diderot and Montesquieu utilized the coffeehouse as a platform to critique existing power structures and promote ideas about justice, equality, and the importance of free thought. Your own beliefs and values may have been influenced by the discussions that took place in these coffeehouses. Coffeehouses were more than just the sum of their parts. They weren't just places where people came to drink coffee and talk about their day. They were places of intellectual and political ferment, where ideas were tested, refined, and ultimately spread to the broader public. If you were someone who wanted to change the world, a coffeehouse was the place to be. It was there that you could find allies, challenge conventional wisdom, and start the conversations that would shape the future. So, as you sit in your coffeehouse today, surrounded by the modern hustle and bustle of the world, it's easy to forget the rich history that brought us here. The coffee house you're in might look different. Sleeker, more modern, with a fancy espresso machine and ambient music playing softly in the background. But the essence of the coffee house remains the same. It's still a place where ideas flow freely, where people come together to discuss, debate, and sometimes even plan for change. And who knows, maybe the next great political movement, the next revolutionary idea, is being quietly discussed in a coffee house right now, just as it was centuries ago. As you lean back in your chair, savoring the last drops of your coffee, you're enveloped by the familiar ambience, the buzz of conversation, the clink of cups, and the gentle rustle of papers. These sounds echo through time. The coffee house, much like the world outside, has evolved. What once was a simple meeting place for intellectuals, merchants, and artists has now become an institution that transcends borders, cultures, and eras. Yet, amidst this evolution, the enduring spirit of the coffee house remains unchanged. Please take a moment to consider this. We live in a world where coffee shops are ubiquitous. You can walk into a cafe on almost any corner in any city in the world. From the smallest village to the most significant metropolis, you're likely to find a place where people can sit, sip their coffee, and chat. But in many ways, the modern coffee house has evolved into something different. It's no longer just a place for intellectual debates or business deals. Today, it's as much about relaxation and escape as it is about conversation. We visit coffee houses to recharge, gather our thoughts, and feel part of a larger community, even if we're observing the world from behind a laptop screen or a book. Yet, when you stop and think about it, there's something undeniably familiar about today's coffee houses and those of the 17th and 18th centuries. Sure, the decor might be sleeker and the coffee a bit fancier, but the core purpose of the coffee house remains the same. It's a place where ideas are shared, where people from all walks of life come together, and where conversations have the potential to spark something bigger than themselves. Whether you're talking about the latest movie, discussing a new business venture, or debating politics, you're still participating in the same tradition that started in those early coffee houses hundreds of years ago. The role of the coffee house in modern society has grown in significance. Today, coffee houses serve as vibrant hubs for community interaction, cultural exchange, and even political discourse. Look around. There's no shortage of coffee houses that host local events, discussions, and social movements. From open mic nights to book clubs, poetry readings to panel discussions, the modern coffee house is a place where ideas flow freely, just as they did in the past. And while the topics of conversation may have shifted, the spirit of the coffee house remains unchanged, offering a sense of belonging and community to all who enter. But there's more. In our digital age, coffee houses have taken on an additional role as gathering spaces for remote workers, freelancers, and entrepreneurs. It's not uncommon to see someone with their laptop open, working away while sipping a latte, surrounded by the hum of conversation. In this way, the coffee house has become the original co-working space. Before WeWork or any of its competitors existed, there were the coffee houses, places to work, think, and connect. It's fascinating to consider how this one concept, a simple place to drink coffee, has evolved over centuries into the modern, multifunctional space we know today. Even in the digital age, the importance of face-to-face interaction remains undiminished. We're still social creatures, after all. While social media has its place, there's something irreplaceable about sitting across from someone, having a real conversation, and sharing a cup of coffee. Perhaps that's why coffee houses have endured, because they provide something we crave: connection. They give us a space to relax, to talk, and to feel like we belong. Let's take a moment to appreciate the global spread of coffeehouse culture. Over the past few decades, coffee houses have become a staple in cities worldwide, from New York to Tokyo, from Paris to Sydney. In many ways, coffee houses have become a symbol of globalization. They represent the blending of cultures, the exchange of ideas, and the accessibility of information. The coffee house has become a global meeting point, a place where people from all corners of the world can come together, relax, and share their thoughts and ideas. However, even as coffeehouses have become increasingly international, it's essential to remember that the history of the coffeehouse isn't just a Western tale. The coffeehouse culture has its roots in the Middle East, where coffee was first cultivated and enjoyed. The first coffeehouses, known as kaveh-khana, were established in the 15th century in the Middle East, and they quickly became gathering places for intellectuals, poets, and artists. The Middle Eastern coffeehouse was not only a place to drink coffee, but also a space for discussion and debate, much like its European counterparts. The influence of these early coffeehouses can still be seen today in both the culture of the coffeehouse and the global appreciation for coffee itself. Now, fast forward to the present day, and coffeehouses remain an integral part of modern life. You walk into a coffeehouse today, and it's hard not to notice the sense of community that exists within the space. People share their ideas, work on projects, or relax and watch the world go by. It's a space that brings people together, whether you're meeting with friends or strangers, whether you're working on a new idea or just escaping the chaos of the outside world. The charm of the coffeehouse is undeniable. It's a place that invites you to slow down, to enjoy the moment, and to connect with those around you. The coffee may have changed, the decor may be more modern, but the spirit of the coffeehouse remains timeless. It's still a place for conversation, connection, and contemplation. And, just as it did centuries ago, the coffeehouse continues to serve as a place where ideas percolate, creativity blooms, and communities grow. As you sit in the coffeehouse, feeling the warmth of the drink in your hands, it's hard not to feel a sense of connection to the generations that have come before you. In a world that moves faster and faster every day, it's comforting to know that the coffeehouse, this simple space for conversation and connection, has remained a constant. And who knows, maybe, just like in those early days, a conversation you have today could change the course of history. You sit back and take a moment to enjoy the soothing warmth of your coffee. As the steam rises from your cup, you feel the deep comfort of the familiar surroundings, the chatter of fellow patrons, the soft clink of spoons stirring in cups, and the low hum of conversation. But as you look around, something about this scene strikes you as strangely familiar. Could it be that the coffeehouse, in its way, is more than just a place to drink coffee and chat? Could it be the blueprint for something much larger, something that exists in nearly every corner of our modern lives? It's not just a place to meet people, it's a prototype for the contemporary social networks we use today. Yes, you read that right. The coffeehouse has a surprising connection to the world of social media. You see, before we ever had Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, we had the coffeehouse, a place where people connected, shared ideas, and built communities. The parallels are uncanny when you stop to think about it. In the 17th and 18th centuries, coffeehouses weren't just places for quiet reflection. They were hubs of social interaction, platforms for exchanging ideas and sparking conversations. Today, when you think about the purpose of social media, it's no different. These platforms are built on the same basic premise: to create a space where people can interact, share their thoughts, and ultimately build a network of connections. Imagine stepping into a coffeehouse in London during the 1600s. You look around and see a group of intellectuals deeply immersed in conversation about the nature of government. Nearby, a merchant is discussing the latest trade routes with a fellow businessman. At another table, a group of writers is debating the merits of different literary styles. And there, in the corner, a poet is quietly working on their next piece, inspired by the ideas swirling around them. Each of these individuals is connected in some way by the ideas they share, the discussions they have, and the relationships they're building. Now picture today. You log into a social network, and suddenly you're part of a vast network of ideas, opinions, and connections. You might post a thought, a question, or a piece of news, and before long, people from all over the world are interacting with you. They comment, share, and contribute their perspectives. Some might be people you've never met, while others might be old friends or colleagues. In a sense, this online network is a modern-day coffeehouse, a digital space where ideas are exchanged, friendships are formed, and people come together to share what matters most to them. Historians continue to debate whether the internet, with its numerous platforms and connectivity, is truly a revolution in human interaction or merely a continuation of older social structures. However, upon examining the coffeehouse, it becomes clear that both the digital world and the 17th century world share the same essential elements. Both are spaces where we come together to interact, to debate, and to learn from one another. And in both worlds, coffee is the drink that fuels the conversation. Whether it's the caffeine keeping you alert during a long day at the office or the momentary clarity that a sip of your favorite brew provides in a crowded coffeehouse, it's the same experience. Ideas come alive, relationships are built, and the flow of communication continues without interruption. Unlike the carefully curated content we see on social media, the coffeehouse was a bit more raw. People came together not just to share their thoughts, but to argue, to laugh, and sometimes to get frustrated. Just like today, you could overhear people discussing the latest trends, engaging in heated debates, or simply enjoying the ambience. The difference, however, was that there was a more organic sense of exchange. The coffeehouse was a space where intellectuals, poets, and ordinary people alike could engage in spontaneous, often messy, but always meaningful exchanges of ideas. In many ways, it was the original open forum for public discussion. In this place, anyone could show up, join the conversation, and contribute to the intellectual and social fabric of the community. Let's not forget that the coffeehouse wasn't only about the big ideas or the heavy debates. It was also about connection on a smaller scale. There was room for personal stories, lighthearted conversations, and the kind of small talk that makes social interaction so enjoyable. After all, much like social media today, it wasn't just about the grandiose ideas. It was also about the connections we make, the friendships we form, and the relationships that blossom from seemingly simple interactions. The people in the coffeehouse didn't just talk politics. They spoke of their families, their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. It was a space for both the profound and the mundane, a place where every conversation, no matter how big or small, added to the rich tapestry of human interaction. In a way, social media is much like the coffeehouse, but with one key difference. The conversations today can be endless. The internet has taken the concept of the coffeehouse and amplified it on a global scale. Just as people in past coffeehouses did, we now connect with others from around the world, sharing our thoughts, ideas, and stories with anyone who will listen. The digital coffeehouse of today allows us to interact with a vast array of people we'd never have met otherwise. It's the modern version of the coffeehouse that has gone global. However, it's also important to remember that just as there were critics of the coffeehouse in the past, those who saw it as a breeding ground for rebellion, gossip, and low culture, there are those today who see social media as a chaotic, sometimes shallow space. Some argue that the easy accessibility of social media has diluted the depth of conversation and made interactions more surface level. But no matter how you look at it, the basic concept remains unchanged. The coffeehouse and its modern counterpart, the social network, are built on the same foundation of human interaction. They are places where ideas are exchanged, connections are made, and communities are formed. As you sit in this coffeehouse today, reflecting on the connections made here, the conversations shared, and the ideas sparked, it's clear that this space, whether in the 17th century or now, serves a fundamental human need: connection. Whether you're discussing politics, science, art, or just the weather, you're participating in an age-old tradition of coming together, sharing ideas, and building something larger than yourself. And as you finish your drink, you realize that, in many ways, nothing has changed. The coffeehouse, in its various forms, remains a space where people can connect, create, and communicate. It's a place where ideas flourish, relationships are forged, and a sense of community is always just a sip away. You take a slow, deliberate sip of your coffee, the warmth spreading through your chest as the soft hum of conversation fills the space around you. The setting feels familiar, comfortable, yet there's an underlying energy that's hard to ignore. This is more than just a coffeehouse. It's a place where people from all walks of life gather, where ideas flow freely, and where creativity is sparked. But here's the twist. You're not just sitting in a casual cafe. You're in a place that mirrors, in many ways, the modern workplace. The very same space where people collaborate, create, and make decisions that impact industries, communities, and even entire nations. It's funny how coffee houses, which once served as informal spaces for intellectual and social gatherings, have evolved into environments that closely resemble today's workspaces, co-working hubs, and innovation labs. Let's think about it. How many of us now go to coffee houses to meet with colleagues, clients, or partners? How many people use these spaces as informal offices, sitting with their laptops open, typing away, or having a casual meeting while sipping a cappuccino? You're probably one of them. Sitting in a coffee house, working away, tapping at your keyboard, preparing your next presentation or brainstorming ideas for your latest project. This scene is prevalent in today's world, but it also serves as a modern reflection of a centuries-old tradition. In the 17th and 18th centuries, coffee houses had already become spaces for business and intellectual exchange, and these same dynamics continue to apply to modern workplaces. The influence of coffee houses on the modern workplace is profound. These early establishments were where businesspeople, intellectuals, and creative minds gathered to discuss ideas, share news, and collaborate on various ventures. Today, the same collaborative energy exists in co-working spaces, coffee houses, and even virtual meetings, where teams work together, discuss strategies, and innovate. The open, dynamic environment of a coffee house encourages the free flow of ideas, and that's precisely what many modern businesses thrive on. The relaxed atmosphere, the hum of background conversation, and the availability of caffeine, which has been scientifically proven to enhance cognitive function and alertness, seem to work in perfect harmony to fuel creativity and productivity. Historians often debate whether the coffee house was the actual birthplace of modern business culture, or whether that culture would have emerged even without it. Some argue that the coffee house played a crucial role in the development of early forms of networking, collaboration, and the exchange of ideas. For instance, in these spaces, businesspeople could meet potential partners, customers, and collaborators, often without the formalities of a traditional office. Others argue that business culture, with its focus on efficiency and productivity, evolved through other means. Regardless of the origins, it's clear that coffee houses laid the groundwork for the modern workspace. The concept of informal collaboration, where ideas can be shared in an open and dynamic environment, has shaped the way we approach work today. Take a step back and consider how much the workplace has changed over the past few decades. Once dominated by rigid hierarchies and traditional office structures, the modern workplace has evolved into a more flexible, open space. Gone are the days of having to sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5. Instead, many people now work remotely at coffee houses, in co-working spaces, or even in cafes, where they can interact with others while working on their projects. It's this flexibility, this ability to move freely between spaces, that is, in many ways, a direct descendant of the early coffeehouse culture. Back in the day, people didn't always meet in formal offices. They met in places like the coffee house, where they could have a casual conversation and get down to business. The beauty of this modern workplace is that it's more than just a place to get work done. It's a place where ideas can blossom. Like the coffee houses of old, today's workspace is about community, collaboration, and creativity. Whether you're an entrepreneur brainstorming ideas, a writer looking for inspiration, or a team working on a new project, the open, dynamic environment of a coffee house or co-working space provides the perfect atmosphere to do your best work. However, it's essential to note that this model may not be suitable for all types of work, and some individuals may find the noise and distractions of a coffee house to be disruptive to their productivity. The coffee house model has shifted and evolved, but it remains a central part of our daily lives, just as it was in centuries past. Let's not forget that the coffee house was a space for more than work. It was a place for connection. This sense of connection is what makes the modern workplace so powerful. It's not just about completing tasks or meeting deadlines. It's about building relationships, sharing ideas, and fostering a sense of community. You can't overlook the importance of human connection, whether it's collaborating with a colleague on a new idea or simply exchanging pleasantries with the person sitting next to you at the coffee house. These interactions, although seemingly minor, play a crucial role in creating a thriving work culture. Think about the rise of remote work and how it's influenced the modern coffeehouse. Over the past few years, as more people have worked from home or adopted flexible schedules, coffeehouses have adapted and become a vital part of the working landscape. Many remote workers now use coffeehouses as their office away from home, taking advantage of the space to work, hold meetings, and connect with others. It's not just about the caffeine, though that certainly helps, it's about the environment. The coffeehouse provides an atmosphere that feels different from the traditional office, one that's more relaxed, creative, and conducive to thinking outside the box. It's easy to see how the coffeehouse has evolved into the modern-day co-working space, but even more interesting is the way these spaces are now being used to foster innovation. Startups, tech companies, and creative agencies often embrace open, flexible workspaces where employees can move freely, collaborate, and share ideas. These spaces, much like the early coffeehouses, encourage spontaneous collaboration. Just as coffeehouses once sparked discussions about political ideas and scientific advancements, today's co-working spaces spark new business ideas, creative solutions, and innovations that could change the world. So, as you sit here, savoring your coffee, you realize that the connection between the past and the present is undeniable. The humble coffeehouse, once a gathering place for intellectuals and merchants, has become the very space where our modern work culture thrives. The relaxed, open, and collaborative environment that made the coffeehouse so important centuries ago is the same environment that makes today's workplace so dynamic. Whether in a coffeehouse or a co-working space, people still gather to connect, to share ideas, and to create something new. As you look around at the people in the coffeehouse, you see them as part of a long tradition of collaboration and innovation. From the thinkers and dreamers of the past to the entrepreneurs and creatives of today, the spirit of the coffeehouse lives on. And who knows, the next great idea, the next big breakthrough, often comes from someone sitting in a coffeehouse, tapping away at their laptop and brainstorming over a cup of coffee. As you sit back, savoring the rich aroma of your coffee, you're enveloped in a sense of deep satisfaction. The coffeehouse hums with activity, yet there's a serene rhythm to the way people move and interact. It's easy to forget, in this modern space, that the roots of the coffeehouse extend far beyond these cozy walls. Reflecting on its history, you realize the profound influence it has had, weaving through cultures, societies, and continents, creating a sense of connection and community that you're now a part of. Coffeehouses didn't just stay in the quiet streets of London or the coffee hubs of Paris. No, they were part of a much larger global story, one that began in the Middle East and gradually spread across the world. Imagine this, you're sitting in one of the very first coffeehouses in the Middle East, in the heart of a city like Istanbul or Cairo. It's the 15th century, and the rich aroma of coffee fills the air. The conversation around you is lively and energetic, and there's a buzz of activity. But what you're witnessing is far more than just people enjoying a cup of coffee. You're watching the beginning of a cultural exchange that will span centuries and continents. The first coffeehouses were established in the Ottoman Empire, where coffee was originally cultivated and celebrated. These spaces, known as kahvekhane, became hubs of intellectual conversation, artistic expression, and social gathering. People from all walks of life gathered in these establishments, discussing politics, religion, and philosophy, much like their European counterparts would centuries later. However, there was something uniquely different about the Middle Eastern coffeehouse. Here, the art of conversation was held in exceptionally high esteem, often accompanied by music, poetry, and performances. In many ways, the coffeehouse was the heart of cultural life. As coffeehouses spread throughout the Ottoman Empire, their influence began to extend to parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. The first coffeehouse in Europe opened in Venice in the late 16th century, and from there, the idea spread across Italy, France, and England. It wasn't long before coffeehouses became a central part of European culture, and by the 17th century, they had firmly established themselves as places of intellectual and artistic exchange. But even more interesting than their spread across Europe was the way these coffeehouses facilitated cultural exchange. The simple act of drinking coffee had a way of bringing people together, regardless of their origins. As the coffeehouse culture spread, It became a melting pot of ideas and influences from various parts of the world. Consider this. As Europeans flocked to coffeehouses to discuss the latest developments in science, politics, and philosophy, they were also being exposed to new cultures, ideas, and ways of thinking. The coffeehouse became a place of mutual learning, where people from different backgrounds could come together, share their knowledge, and challenge each other's views. In return, the coffeehouse culture also introduced European ideas to places like the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, where they were integrated into local customs and traditions. One of the most captivating aspects of this global expansion was how coffeehouses evolved into hubs for the exchange of literature and art. Today, when you step into a coffeehouse, you might see people engrossed in their digital devices. But centuries ago, these were the places where the latest books, plays, and poetry were shared and discussed. Writers would gather to present their work, poets would recite their verses, and artists would showcase their newest creations. The sense of community and collaboration was palpable, and the coffeehouse became a place where cultural boundaries were blurred and new ideas were born, inspiring generations to come. Historians continue to debate the extent to which coffeehouses influenced the course of cultural exchange worldwide. Some argue that the coffeehouse played a vital role in the emergence of modern global culture. In contrast, others contend that the actual influence of these establishments was more local, confined to specific regions or nations. Regardless of where one lands on this debate, it's clear that coffeehouses had a profound effect on the way cultures interacted with one another. They were places where ideas from different corners of the world were blended, reshaped, and shared with others, creating a global exchange that continues to resonate today. As the 18th century progressed, coffeehouses continued to spread throughout Europe and the Americas, each one developing its distinct character, shaped by the local culture and customs. In France, coffeehouses became synonymous with the intellectual salons of Paris, where artists and philosophers gathered to discuss art, science, and politics. In America, coffeehouses became gathering places for revolutionaries and thinkers, laying the groundwork for the country's independence. In other parts of the world, coffeehouses became places where people could meet, exchange ideas, and collaborate on a range of topics, from local politics to international trade. Today, coffeehouses have seamlessly integrated into modern society. Whether you're in New York, Tokyo, or Cape Town, you can find a coffeehouse where people from all walks of life come together to drink coffee, chat, and share ideas. The world may have changed in countless ways since the first coffeehouses were established, but the sense of connection, community, and collaboration that they fostered remains as powerful as ever. You're not just reading about history, you're part of a living tradition. But let's not forget the original essence of the coffeehouse: its ability to bring people together in a way that no other space could. In an era of global connectivity and digital media, the coffeehouse remains a distinctive space where people can gather in person, share their ideas, and forge relationships that are increasingly difficult to replicate online. Just as it was in the past, the coffeehouse remains a symbol of the power of face-to-face interaction, cultural exchange, and the shared human experience. As you finish your coffee and prepare to leave, you can't help but think about the vast history that this humble beverage has traveled through. From the coffeehouses of the Ottoman Empire to the bustling cafes of Paris, and now to the modern coffeehouses of today, the journey of coffee has always been one of connection, collaboration, and exchange. You're sitting in a space that, in many ways, connects you to people from all over the world, from different times and places, all united by the simple pleasure of a cup of coffee. The coffeehouse is quiet now, with only the sound of soft chatter and the occasional clink of porcelain cups breaking the calm. You finish your coffee, feeling its comforting warmth spreading through you. As you sit there, you can't help but think about the role this place has played in shaping the world. It wasn't just the birthplace of ideas, it was also the birthplace of journalism. When you think about it, the world we live in today, where news travels across continents in an instant, owes much of its roots to the humble coffeehouse. Imagine stepping into a coffeehouse during the 17th or 18th century. You take in the warm, inviting atmosphere, the soft hum of voices around you, and the rhythmic clicking of quills on parchment. In these early coffeehouses, you wouldn't just overhear debates on science or philosophy. You'd hear about the latest political developments, the newest pamphlets being passed around, and the newest news that had made its way into the public consciousness. It was here, in these gathering places, that the foundation for modern journalism was laid. The rise of coffeehouses coincided with the growth of the press. As newspapers, pamphlets, and broadsheets began to circulate, coffeehouses became their first stage. Places where people could read the latest reports, engage in discussions, and share their opinions. At a time when information was scarce and took weeks or even months to disseminate, coffeehouses served as an early form of media. They were the centers where news was exchanged, where public opinion was formed, and where the first inklings of modern journalism emerged. Historians still debate whether coffeehouses themselves were responsible for the development of journalism or whether the press was simply a product of broader social changes. The coffeehouse provided the ideal environment for journalists and pamphleteers to meet their readers, discuss their ideas, and disseminate their work. Others contend that journalism would have evolved independently, with or without the coffeehouse, as people naturally sought to exchange information. Either way, there's no denying the role coffeehouses played in giving rise to a new kind of public discourse. A discourse centered around the free flow of information and the exchange of ideas. In those early coffeehouses, people not only consumed news, they also created it. Writers and journalists would gather in coffeehouses to brainstorm, debate, and sometimes even publish their work. The very first newspapers and pamphlets were distributed through these spaces, often read aloud or passed from table to table. Coffeehouses were the original newsrooms, with the difference that they weren't full of clattering keyboards and editorial meetings. Instead, they were filled with people discussing the latest news, sharing their opinions, and offering feedback. It was a more informal and spontaneous version of journalism, but it shared the same goal: to inform the public and spark discussion. And what did people discuss? Politics, of course. In the coffeehouses of London and Paris, people debated the issues of the day, questions of power, governance, rights, and freedom. In a world where political systems were changing rapidly and new ideas about democracy, freedom of speech, and the role of the state were emerging, the coffeehouse was a place where these ideas could be freely aired, challenged, and refined. Think of it as the first political talk show, except with much less sensationalism and much more genuine debate. It's in this environment that the idea of the public sphere began to take root. People began to realize that the coffeehouse wasn't just a place to meet. It was a place to participate in public life. It was a place where ordinary people could voice their opinions, challenge the status quo, and influence the course of events. The coffeehouse, in this sense, was not just a social space, it was a political one. As the concept of public opinion evolved, so did the role of the press in shaping that opinion. How does this relate to the coffeehouse culture of today? Well, when you look at the evolution of journalism, it's easy to see the roots of modern media in the very same principles that governed those early coffeehouses. The idea of a free press, the importance of public discourse, and the value of an informed citizenry all began in spaces where information was exchanged casually, where ideas were tested and refined, and where public opinion was formed in the most organic way possible. Think about the media landscape today. Whether you're scrolling through social media, watching the latest news broadcast, or reading an online article, you're consuming information that has been shaped by the same principles of exchange, discussion, and public participation that define the coffeehouse culture. The key difference, of course, is the speed and reach of modern communication. While the news in those early coffeehouses took time to spread, today's news travels faster than ever before. However, the underlying principle remains the same. We still rely on a community of people, whether journalists, commentators, or citizens, to share information, express opinions, and foster public discourse. Just as in the coffeehouses of the past, the media today continues to have a profound impact on the way we perceive the world. News shapes our views, influences our decisions, and, yes, sparks new conversations. Modern journalism is a continuation of the very same exchange that began in coffeehouses centuries ago. It's a space for people to come together, to discuss, and to form opinions about the world around them. But just as the coffeehouses were not without their critics, so too is modern journalism often met with skepticism. In those early days, some saw the coffeehouse as a threat to the status quo. In this place, dangerous ideas could spread too freely, where political dissent could fester, and where the very fabric of society could be torn apart by unchecked opinion. Today, we see similar concerns about the role of media in shaping public discourse. Some argue that the media is too polarized, too sensationalized, and too quick to spread misinformation. Others believe that modern journalism, like its coffeehouse predecessor, is still vital for a functioning democracy, providing a space for discussion and public engagement. As you sit back, letting the ambient sounds of the coffeehouse wash over you once again, you realize something profound. The coffeehouse wasn't just the birthplace of journalism. It was also the birthplace of the idea that information, and the right to share it, belongs to the people. And just like that cup of coffee you're sipping, that idea has traveled far, been refilled many times, and continues to fuel our world today. The quiet hum of conversation around you feels almost like a melody now, one that you've gotten used to. The rhythmic tapping of fingers on laptops, the occasional burst of laughter, and the sound of someone stirring their drink all blend into a comfortable background of life. You take another sip of your coffee, feeling the warmth spread through you, and you realize that this humble space is so much more than just a place to grab a quick drink or hold a casual conversation. It's an institution, a space that has shaped culture, influenced civic engagement, and brought about societal change. But more than that, it's a community, a place where ordinary people can gather, engage, and make a difference in the world together. Coffeehouses weren't always seen as a place for serious political or intellectual discourse, at least not by everyone. For some, they were merely places to pass the time, to enjoy a hot drink and catch up with friends. But to many others, the coffeehouse was a forum, a space where people could come together to discuss issues that mattered, challenge ideas, and raise awareness about injustices. In the 17th and 18th centuries, coffeehouses became the heartbeat of civic engagement, spaces where individuals could speak freely, organize movements, and unite around causes that could change the course of history. Picture this. You're sitting in one of the coffeehouses of London, Paris, or Istanbul, surrounded by people engaged in passionate conversation about the issues of the day. You overhear debates about the rights of women, about slavery, and about the inequality between the rich and the poor. People aren't just discussing abstract theories, they're talking about how these issues affect real lives, real communities, and real people. The coffeehouse wasn't a space for armchair philosophers. It was a place where ideas could turn into action, where voices could be raised, and where the public conscience could be shaped. The coffeehouse became an incubator for social movements. Whether it was the abolitionist movement, the early suffrage movement, or calls for more equitable economic systems, the coffeehouse was often where the conversations began. It was in these spaces that people began to demand more from their governments, their societies, and from one another. The coffeehouse became the birthplace of social progress, and it's hard to overstate how important that was. It wasn't just about the coffee, it was about the collective will to change the world, to make it a better place. As you sit in your modern coffeehouse today, you might be scrolling through your phone, checking the latest news, or reading about the latest social issue. In many ways, you're participating in the same process that took place centuries ago. The spirit of civic engagement, in which ordinary people come together to discuss the issues of the day, is still alive and well. And while the tools of communication have certainly changed, from pamphlets and broadsheets to blogs and social media, the core principle remains the same. People need spaces where they can come together to share ideas, engage with others, and make their voices heard. Historians still debate whether coffeehouses were a cause of civic engagement or merely a reflection of larger societal shifts. Some argue that the coffeehouse acted as a catalyst for political and social movements, providing a space where people could exchange ideas that led to meaningful change. Others suggest that the movements themselves were born out of economic, political, or social tensions, and that the coffee house provided a space for those ideas to be amplified. Regardless of which side you take, the fact remains that the coffeehouse culture was one of the first places where individuals could gather, share ideas, and take action. It's a testament to the power of these spaces to amplify voices and ideas and to empower individuals to make a difference. One of the most fascinating aspects of the coffeehouse's influence on civic engagement was its ability to transcend class boundaries. In those early days, coffeehouses weren't restricted to the upper echelons of society. Instead, they were accessible to people from all walks of life: merchants, tradespeople, artists, intellectuals, and even politicians. The coffeehouse became a space where ideas could be exchanged freely, regardless of social status. It was, in essence, the early version of a democratic space, a place where everyone had an equal right to participate in the conversation. This inclusivity fostered a diverse range of perspectives, enriching the discourse and contributing to the societal impact of these spaces. This sense of democratic participation was what made coffeehouses so powerful. Just like today's social networks, coffeehouses enabled people to connect with like-minded individuals, organize around common causes, and advocate for change. It's no surprise that many of the most important social movements of the past, whether it was the rise of civil rights movements or calls for gender equality, began in spaces just like these. People who might have been marginalized in other settings found a voice in the coffeehouse, where ideas took precedence over social standing and where all voices could be heard. In modern times, we see the same principle at work. The coffeehouse, although it has evolved into a more commercial space in many cases, still retains its place as a space for civic engagement. Look around, and you'll see individuals gathering to talk about their passions, their concerns, and their visions for a better world. Whether it's environmental justice, human rights, or political change, the coffeehouse remains a place where people can come together, exchange ideas, and push for progress. But it's not just about the grand, sweeping movements. The coffeehouse is also a place for personal engagement and social change on a smaller, more local scale. Take, for instance, the countless community initiatives that have started in coffeehouses, local fundraisers, support groups, grassroots organizations, and more. The idea of a community cafe isn't just a modern trend. It's a return to the roots of what the coffeehouse once represented: a space for connection, collaboration, and action. These local initiatives, often born in the cozy corners of a coffeehouse, are a testament to the enduring influence of these spaces in fostering community and driving social change. As you sit here, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the gentle click of laptops, you realize that this coffeehouse, in its quiet way, continues to play a role in shaping the world. The space may look different, more polished, more commercialized, but the spirit of civic engagement, of creating a better world through conversation and collaboration, still thrives. Whether it's a local initiative or a global movement, the coffeehouse continues to serve as a microcosm of the larger world, where ideas are exchanged, people connect, and change is possible. So, take a moment to appreciate the power of this space. The coffeehouse isn't just a place to drink coffee. It's a place where movements are born, where connections are made, and where change happens. It's the place where ordinary people can come together to make their voices heard, challenge the status quo, and work toward a more just and equitable world. And that's something to savor, sip by sip, as you take another sip of your coffee, feeling the warmth seep through you. The soft murmur of conversation around you feels oddly comforting. There's something about being in a space like this, a coffeehouse, that makes you feel both connected to the world and part of a larger community. It's as if, for a moment, the hustle and bustle of life has been distilled into a warm, cozy, focused atmosphere. But as you sit here, sipping and reflecting, you can't help but think about the profound, almost symbolic role that the coffeehouse plays in our global culture. In many ways, the coffeehouse is the quintessential symbol of global connection. Imagine this. No matter where you are in the world, from the streets of Istanbul to the corners of Paris, from the bustling cities of Africa to the quiet lanes of South America, coffeehouses are everywhere. And while each coffeehouse has its unique character, shaped by the local culture, traditions, and environment, There's something unmistakably universal about them. The coffeehouse experience transcends geographic boundaries, socioeconomic divisions, and even language barriers. It's a space where people come together, share ideas, and connect. It doesn't matter if you're in London or Buenos Aires. The feeling of stepping into a coffeehouse is the same, creating a sense of commonality with people from different cultures. But what is it about the coffeehouse that makes it such a powerful symbol of connection? It's the way it brings people from all walks of life together, united by one simple thing: the shared love of coffee. That love of coffee creates an atmosphere that encourages conversation, collaboration, and community. In the early coffeehouses, people gathered to debate politics, discuss philosophy, or share their latest experiences and observations. In the modern coffeehouse, that same spirit of connection persists, albeit in a slightly different form. Today, coffeehouses continue to serve as gathering places where people meet, work, and share ideas. They may not always possess the same intellectual gravitas they once had, but they still cultivate a sense of community and global connection. The coffeehouse can be seen as a metaphor for the interconnectedness of people in today's world. Just as coffeehouses in the past were a space for intellectual and social exchange, today's coffeehouses are places where people connect across cultures, countries, and backgrounds. You might be sitting next to someone from a completely different part of the world, someone who speaks a different language or has a different worldview. But in this coffeehouse, you're united by something simple: the shared experience of sitting together, enjoying a cup of coffee, and exchanging ideas. There's a certain magic in that, a sense of global connection that is difficult to replicate in other spaces. Historically, coffeehouses were not just places where ideas and information were exchanged. They were places where cultures interacted. As coffeehouses spread across the globe, they became hubs where cultures from diverse regions converged. In the Middle East, coffeehouses served as centers of artistic and intellectual exchange, with poets and scholars gathering to share their work and ideas. In Europe, they evolved into hubs of political discussion and scientific discovery, with thinkers such as Voltaire and Rousseau utilizing them as their intellectual playgrounds. Over time, the coffeehouse evolved into a space where people could not only engage with ideas from different cultures, but also learn about one another's customs, values, and perspectives. Coffeehouses were, and still are, a place where cultural boundaries blur and where people come together to share not just coffee, but the essence of who they are. This idea of connection and cultural exchange is particularly relevant in today's globalized world. We live in an era where travel is easier than ever, allowing us to communicate with people from all corners of the world in real time. Just as the coffeehouses of the past did, this new digital world offers endless opportunities for people to connect and share ideas. Social media, like the coffeehouses of old, has become a platform for ideas to flow freely, for conversations to happen, and for people to build communities around shared interests. In many ways, social media is the modern equivalent of the coffeehouse, though with a digital twist. However, unlike the coffeehouses of the past, where face-to-face interactions were crucial, social media enables a more distant form of connection. The experience of sharing a coffee in a bustling cafe is different from the experience of typing a comment on a post from halfway across the world. However, the basic premise remains the same. At the heart of both the coffeehouse and social media is the desire to connect with others, share ideas, and be part of something larger than ourselves. And in a way, the coffeehouse represents a timeless symbol of this connection. Now, think about the coffeehouse in the context of modern-day global movements. Whether it's climate activism, social justice, or movements for equality and human rights, coffeehouses have long been spaces where the seeds of such movements are planted. People gather, discuss, and organize for change, all while enjoying a cup of coffee. The coffeehouse is not just a passive space. It is an active space, one that fosters engagement, dialogue, and collaboration. The humble coffeehouse has been at the center of numerous social movements, providing a platform for individuals to come together and advocate for the changes they want to see in the world. From the birth of the French Revolution in the Café de Foy to the civil rights movement in the American South, coffeehouses have been the birthplace of change. In today's world, the cultural and social significance of the coffeehouse is more critical than ever. In an era of growing political polarization and social division, the coffeehouse remains a space where people can gather, engage in meaningful conversations, and discover common ground. It's a place where diverse viewpoints can coexist, where the sharing of ideas can lead to new understandings, and where, through the simple act of coming together, we can bridge the gaps that divide us. The role of coffeehouses in fostering dialogue and understanding is more important than ever, making these spaces a crucial part of today's society. As you sit here, contemplating the history of the coffeehouse, you realize that its impact is still being felt today. The coffeehouse remains a symbol of global connection, human interaction, and community power. Whether you're sitting in a cafe in your hometown or connecting with someone halfway across the globe, the spirit of the coffeehouse lives on. It's a space for connection, for conversation, for collaboration, and, as it has been for centuries, a place where the world comes together one cup at a time. You slowly place your empty cup on the table, the warmth still lingering in your fingers as you lean back and take a moment to absorb the atmosphere around you. The world outside continues to move at a hurried pace, but here, in the quietude of this coffeehouse, time feels just a little slower, and in this peaceful moment, you begin to reflect on the coffeehouse's profound legacy. The way it has shaped not only the world of ideas, politics, and culture, but also the way we live our lives today. After all, how often do we stop to think about the small spaces that have helped shape the world around us? How often do we recognize the quiet influence of places like this, where history was made with nothing more than the exchange of words, the sharing of stories, and a simple cup of coffee? The legacy of the coffeehouse is alive in countless ways in our daily lives, though we might not always recognize it. We've already seen how the coffeehouse has influenced the rise of public opinion, the spread of political movements, and the evolution of journalism. However, its impact extends far beyond that. It has left a lasting mark on everything from modern workplaces to the way we engage with our communities and the world at large. Think about the everyday coffee shops you visit. Whether it's the local cafe down the street or a chain coffeehouse you pop into before work, these modern-day spaces are, in many ways, descendants of the coffeehouses of the past. While the conversation might focus on the day's to-do list or a quick chat with a friend, the essence of the coffeehouse remains unchanged. It's still a space where ideas are exchanged, where connections are made, and where the rhythm of life slows down just enough for us to breathe, reflect, and reconnect. For many people, the coffeehouse is also a crucial part of their daily routine. It's not just about getting a caffeine fix. It's about the ritual of sitting down, taking a break, and stepping out of the fast-paced world for a while. Much like the patrons of the first coffeehouses, modern coffee drinkers use their time in the coffeehouse to recharge, catch up with others, or reflect on the world around them. These places have become refuges, offering a chance to pause, think, and gather strength before heading back out into the chaos of daily life. Yet, the coffeehouse's legacy extends beyond personal reflection. These spaces have evolved into vital community hubs, where people gather not only to share ideas, but also to make a difference. They're where local activists organize, where small businesses are born, and where social movements continue to grow. The coffeehouse, once a space for intellectual debate, has transformed into a community center, a cultural touchstone, and even an incubator for new ideas. This evolution is a natural extension of the coffeehouse's original purpose: to bring people together, exchange ideas, and inspire action. As you sit back and reflect, you realize that the coffeehouse has played a significant role in shaping the modern social landscape. Just as coffeehouses in the 17th century became spaces where people from all walks of life could engage in free discussion, today's coffeehouses continue to serve as meeting places for diverse groups of people. They are spaces where cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives intersect. In today's world, where divisive forces often seem to pull us apart, the coffeehouse remains a symbol of unity. In this place, people can come together, share a moment of connection, and leave with a greater understanding of one another. And let's not forget the role that the coffeehouse has played in shaping how we work today. As the workplace has become more flexible, with remote work and co-working spaces on the rise, the coffeehouse has become an unofficial office for millions of people. You might be reading this in the comfort of your home, but how many times have you worked from a coffeehouse? Meeting with colleagues? Holding impromptu brainstorming sessions? Or simply enjoying the solitude needed to get things done? The coffeehouse has evolved into a multifunctional space, one that serves as a place of work, creativity, and social interaction all rolled into one. More than just a place to grab a cup of coffee, the coffeehouse has become a symbol of connection in an increasingly fragmented world. With social media, news outlets, and the pressures of modern life, it can be easy to feel disconnected from others. The coffeehouse, however, offers a chance to slow down, to engage in face-to-face interactions, and to be reminded that community still exists, even in the digital age. It's a place where you can disconnect from your screens, engage with those around you, and share in a small but meaningful experience. As you sit there, finishing your coffee and feeling the world outside start to encroach once more, you're reminded of the incredible legacy of the coffeehouse. What began as a simple gathering space in the Middle East has evolved into an institution that shapes everything from politics to culture, from business to social movements. The coffeehouse is not just a relic of history, it's a living, breathing part of our world today. As you step back into the hustle and bustle of the world outside, you can't help but feel grateful for the quiet moments you've spent here. For centuries, the coffeehouse has been a space where ideas have flourished, where people have connected, and where the pulse of society has been felt. As you leave, carrying the warmth of the coffeehouse with you, you realize that this place, this humble, ordinary space, has the power to change the world. All it takes is a conversation, a sip of coffee, and a willingness to listen. So, the next time you find yourself walking into a coffeehouse, take a moment to pause. Reflect on the legacy that these spaces carry and the connections that are made within them. Because in the end, the coffeehouse is not just about coffee. It's about community, about conversation, and the enduring power of human connection. And who knows, maybe the next great idea or social movement will be born in the same place where so many others have found their spark, over a cup of coffee. As you stand up and stretch, the gentle hum of the coffeehouse lingers in your mind, a comforting memory of a moment spent in the quiet embrace of history. The world outside rushes by in a blur of cars and people, all absorbed in the hustle of life. But here, in this small corner, time has slowed, just for a while. The coffeehouse, in its quiet way, has always been a space for connection, reflection, and exchange. It's a place where ideas have been born, where revolutions have been sparked, and where individuals have come together to change the course of history. And now, as you prepare to step back into the world, you carry with you a small piece of that legacy. The beauty of the coffeehouse is its simplicity. It's not grand or pretentious. It's just a space, a room filled with warmth, conversation, and the promise of a shared moment. In a world that often feels divided, the coffeehouse has always been a reminder that, at its core, we're all connected. Whether we're sipping coffee with an old friend, discussing politics with a stranger, or simply reading a book in quiet solitude, the coffeehouse offers a chance to pause, to breathe, and to find meaning in the ordinary. So, as you walk out the door and into the bustling world, take a moment to appreciate the quiet power of this space. It's more than just a cafe. It's a sanctuary where the pulse of humanity beats softly, reminding us that, no matter how fast the world moves, there's always time for a conversation, for an idea, and a cup of coffee.